Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Attracta Lafferty. I'm a research fellow at the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health Systems at the University College Dublin. I'm also a principal investigator on the CareWell project, which is a project here in Ireland which aims to support family carers to reconcile work and care. And that project has a particular focus on promoting health and well-being among family carers and doing that through the workplace. So I'm delighted to be chairing this session this morning on retaining talent, workplace challenges. And this session is part of theme 2 of the Sustainable Care Conference on work, care and wellbeing, new solutions and ongoing challenges. That's theme 2. So we have 4 presentations this morning. Each will be around 12 to 15 minutes, and we'll do our best to keep the time. And that will be followed by the discussant's remarks, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first presenter. I'm delighted to introduce Mandy Cook. Mandy is from Forest Research, and Mandy is going to be presenting to us on the workplace challenges and opportunities of supporting employees who balance employment with unpaid. Welcome, Mandy. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So today I'm going to talk about the workplace challenges and opportunities of supporting employees who balance employment with unpaid care. And this project was part of a fellowship with the University of Sheffield within the Sustainable Care Programme. My fellowship was a partnership project with Carers UK, Employers for Carers and Carer Positive Employer in Scotland. Carers UK is the main membership charity in the United Kingdom for carers. Employers for Carers is part of Carers UK and is a membership organisation which supports employers to retain and manage employees with caring responsibilities. Carer Positive Employer in Scotland is a similar Scottish Government-funded initiative operated by Carers Scotland. My fellowship was funded by ESRC and was aligned to the UK Industrial Strategy, which sets out the UK Government's plan to create an economy that boosts productivity and earning power throughout the UK. Next slide, please. My research focuses on working carers. Employers for Carers offers a definition of working carers as employees with significant caring responsibilities that have a substantial impact on their working lives. These employees are responsible for the care and support of disabled, elderly or sick partners, relatives or friends who are unable to care for themselves. Next slide, please. So this presentation focuses on the challenges and opportunities of supporting employees who balance employment with unpaid care. Populations are ageing, families are changing, and more women are in the workforce. Carers UK state that 58% of carers are female and 42% are male. There are 6.5 million carers in the UK, 80% are working age, and 1/9 of the workforce are working carers at any one time. The associated cost of carers feeling unable to continue working has been estimated to be 1.3 billion a year in the UK. My research drew on qualitative research to examine what can be learned and more widely applied to modernise business organisation and human resource management, so UK companies can get best value for their ageing and increasingly caring workforces. Next slide, please. Employers are increasingly recognising caring as a key issue for workforce retention, recruitment and resilience. In the current economic climate, understanding why this matters to business has never been so important. To help understand these issues, Employers for Carers conducted an online survey targeted at employers in the UK. which aim to gather information on the business benefits of supporting carers in the workplace. Employers indicated that the highest benefits of supporting working carers were for increasing staff morale and loyalty, staff retention, and reducing absenteeism. Next slide, please. Today I'm going through the research part of my fellowship. For Research Project 1, I interviewed employers who were either Employer for Carers members or were part of the Carer Positive in Scotland programme. Many of the employers I interviewed were seen as exemplary in their support of working carers. For Research Project 2, I carried out 4 industrial placements which focused on sectors of key importance for the UK industrial strategy and looked at what practical proposals would strengthen support for working carers and benefit businesses in sectors. Next, please. The law in the UK gives all employees statutory rights, which include the right to request flexible working, protection from discrimination, and the right to parental leave. What I'm going to do is use one of the exemplary employers I interviewed as part of the Research Project 1 as a case study, which will give you an idea of the support which had been put in place for working carers, which goes beyond these statutory rights. Next slide, please. So firstly, this employer had a dedicated carers policy, which sets out all the relevant information for carers in one document. For example, special leave, flexible working, family-friendly policies, and sources of help and support. This policy was promoted widely and made accessible to all. This employer also had a carers register and recognised that it had an ageing workforce. The peak age for caring is between the age of 45 and 64 in the UK, and 63% of this organisation's workforce fell within this age range. As shown, this organisation truly values its employees who work and care and offers incentives for them to remain in work. Next slide, please. This is just a quote from the person I interviewed from this organisation. Next slide, please. Unlike many of the European countries, the UK does not offer statutory paid care leave, and Carers UK have been campaigning for many years for all carers in employment to have the right to paid care leave for at least 5 to 10 days. This employer offered very generous paid care leave of up to 6 months. Having dedicated members of staff, for example from human resources or occupational health, as points of contact for carers and managers who are able to provide a first-line advisory service as well as ongoing support, was seen as really important and is something that was frequently mentioned during my placements. The contact team attended external events and invited external speakers to their biannual conferences to share best practice and also make sure they kept up with the latest developments in carer support, as well as the wider thinking as regards employee wellbeing. Next slide, please. The Wellbeing Passport provides carers and their line managers with information about how the individual's responsibilities impact their work. It includes any solutions agreed between the carer and his or her line manager, for example, compressed hours, and is available to any new line manager, so they are aware of the employee's caring role and any solutions agreed. What this organisation has done is expand the remit of the carer passport to make it more relevant to all employees. Next slide, please. And I want to briefly talk about my second research project, which is the 4 placements. Just as a reminder, this second project explores sectors of key importance for the UK industrial strategy and looks at future developments in working carer support. So I agreed 4 placements with public sector, private sector, community interest company, and 1/3 sector employer. All these placements were in low productivity areas. Many of the employees in these placement organisations are in low-skilled, low-paying jobs. The third sector is the only small to medium-sized enterprise with under 250 employees. None of the placement organisations had any formal support for working carers in place, but the plan was for me to spend time with each of them and provide practice recommendations and guidance on how this could be developed and evaluated. The Employees for Carers benchmarking scheme, Carer Confident, has developed 5 key criteria for building a positive and inclusive workforce for all staff who are or who will be carers, and I use these as a framework for my recommendations. My intervention programme for the Community Interest Company was developed in June 2019. So, under preparation, my recommendations focused on recruitment and induction, developing systems to ensure that carers are identified and know they are valued at the first point of entry into employment, and are provided with access to relevant information and support. For managers, my recommendations were to encourage managers to be care aware when dealing with staff and make sure top management are seen to be supportive of all the work done to support carers. I recommended developing a carer contact team, organising a staff wellbeing roadshow and staff survey, which included questions about support for working carers. Under policy and guidance, I recommended writing a carers policy and also introducing carers leave. But because this was something that would take some time, in the meantime, I recommended that the organisation make clear what options were available for carers within the existing special leave and flexible working policies. Under practical support, I recommended mindfulness sessions, which could be sourced in-house. Under peer support, I encouraged the setting up of a peer support group for all sites, as well as a closed Facebook group. Under promoting support, I recommended line manager training, awareness training, and having a dedicated carers page on the staff intranet site. Because these placement organisations were just starting out with their working carer support, the first criteria of preparation was where most of the recommendations were made. After developing the initial intervention programme in June 2019, I went back to the Community Interest Company in October to get some feedback. The person I got the feedback from said, for the Carers' Rights Day in November, we are going to be sending out a SurveyMonkey survey to all staff asking them about their caring responsibilities. We're also going to use Carers' Rights Day to promote the Carers UK website to staff and hold a little pop-up roadshow across all sites. We're in the process of reviewing the induction that we offer to all staff, and this will in the future include Carers UK information and how to contact our workforce and carers champions. The e-learning part of the Employees for Carers website will be incorporated into our leadership programme. We also presented the Employees for Carers website at our management and development days for all Band 6 managers and above. The staff wellbeing roadshows continue to be rolled out across all of our sites. Our wellbeing group will help to promote all the support services we have for working carers, which include referrals to occupational health. And finally, there will also be a promotion of the existing policies to all staff so they are aware we have them, what they include and how to access them. Next slide, please. So my objectives were to make a major contribution to the development of Employees for Carers offer to employers, draw new active members into Employees for Carers from currently underrepresented sectors, and work with Employees for Carers to build acceptance of the rationale for working carer support and engage managers in the manufacturing, private sector and small firms. Next slide, please. From the employers I interviewed in Project One, I wrote these 4 policy briefs, which are available on the Sustainable Care website, and they focus on different sectors of employment, which included local authority, private sector, health and social care sector, and the public sector. Next slide, please. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mandy, and thanks for staying to time. That was spot on. I think it's a fantastic presentation. It's great to start this session with a presentation on, such positive, such examples of solutions of how to support family carers to reconcile work and care. So thank you very much. So I think we're keeping questions and answers until all speakers are presented. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker, and I'm delighted to introduce Mai, say this wrong, Yamaguchi. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And Mai is from Japan Lutheran College, and Mai is going to present to us on well-being and turnover intentions of Japanese working carers. How do they feel about balancing work and care? It's very welcome, Mai. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Mai Yamaguchi, and I'm talking about well-being and turnover intentions of Japanese carers. So next slide, please. Balancing work and long-term care for frail older adults is especially important agenda. Thus, how to decrease the number of the turnover of workers due to the caring role is a crucial political issues in Japan. According to the Employment Status Survey, over half of carers are working. Within all carers, 31% is working female carers and 24% is working male carers. Around 100,000 carers give up work due to caring responsibilities each year. About 80% of those were female. In Japan, there are many hidden carers who cannot talk about their work and work-life balance issues at their workplace. Despite the long-term care insurance program was established in 2000, the burden of family carers has not fully eased. Japanese society has been facing many challenges on family caregiving. It is urgently crucial to find effective solutions. In order to deal with these problems, it is necessary to understand working carers' feelings and intentions about work and care and to take effective steps to decrease unintended turnover due to caring responsibilities, not only from the viewpoint of easing carers' burden, continuum of caring role, and preventing turnover, but from the viewpoint of maintaining and improving carers' well-being. Caring journey is difficult to focus to the end, and it is considered various intentions on work, life, and care would affect the turnover intentions. Next slide, please. As a national initiative, no one forced to leave their job for nursing care initiative has been taken. However, users of family care leave program are very limited. Also, the Minister of Health, Labor and Welfare created a manual for supporting family caregivers by municipalities and community-based integrated care center. This manual will be meaningful in that it pointed out the necessity of the career assessment. Nonetheless, there is a limitation in that there are no specific mandatory programs based on the legislation. With regard to study on balancing work and care, the empirical study revealed that deterioration of working carers' health would cause turnover as well as low productivities at workplace. But there are not so many empirical studies of turnover intention of working carers in Japan. Next slide, please. Thus, the objective of this study was to explore the relationship among well-being, support, feeling of balancing work and care, and turnover intentions of Japanese working carers for eligible users of long-term carer insurance. Next slide, please. In this analysis, we used the data for current working carers. The main variables are turnover intention, well-being, feeling on balancing work and care, and perceived support. Other variables are listed in this slide. Next slide, please. As for the turnover intention, among all respondents, 1 in 10 stated that their intention cannot continue their work, while 22% stated don't know and 68 stated can continue their work. Next slide, please. The bivariated analysis showed that gender, main carer, and co-residents were not significant indicator on turnover intentions. Table 2 shows that more than 1 in 4 respondents who became ill or get injured due to the caring had turnover intentions. Table 3 shows that 22% of those who felt that they cannot provide sufficient care responded that they cannot continue to work. Next slide, please. Table 4 shows that feeling about balancing work and care is associated with their feeling to continuing work. It is notable about 30% of respondents who felt that ideal work-care balance is concentrating to work by not caring, respondents don't know. As seen in Table 5, the percentage of the respondents who answered that they cannot continue to work was significantly less among those who like the current job than those who dislike the current job. We also find about 40% of those who dislike the current job respondent don't know. Next slide, please. There are associations between perceived support and turnover intentions. Table 6 shows that about 60% of those who do not have anyone turn to for advice responded don't know. Table 7 shows that about 22% of those who do not have any colleagues who can talk to about caring responding don't know. Next slide, please. The result of multinomial logistic regression analysis reveals a significant relationship between well-being and feeling of balanced work and care as well as turnover intentions. More specifically, with regard to those who responding cannot continue their work, well-being, feeling of balanced work and care, and intention about work were significantly related to turnover intentions. On the other hand, with regard to those who responding don't know, gender, well-being, feeling of balanced work and care, intention about work, and support were significantly related to turnover intentions. Next slide, please. There are 4 main issues needed to be considered. Firstly, from well-being perspective for working carers, we need to pay attention to the reality that there are so many vulnerable working carers. 60% of those showed depressed tendency. This indicates that it is not enough for us to consider only for the prevention of the turnover, and that there is a risk of deterioration of the life, work, and health unless we urgently take an action to improve the well-being of and quality of life. Secondly, 90% of working carers stated that they wanted to balance work and care. It is an important point for considering the future program to support working carers that the most working carers wish to continue working, even though they are feeling guilty and worrying if their caring might be not sufficient, or they might not take necessary job responsibility because of the caring role. 1 in 10 respondents answered that they would not continue their caring role. Since we cannot force anybody to balance unintended work and care, we need to develop an effective support program for working carers which enables them to balance work and care as they wish, or letting them not to feel they cannot balance work and care. Importantly, we need to give thoughtful attention to diverse, complicated feelings on work and care. Thirdly, the turnover intention, we found 10% of working carers stated not to be able to continue their job, while twice the number of working carers, 20%, stated that they did not know what to do. Usually, when we consider how to deal with the reducing turnover due to the care, we tend to focus on only those who intending quitting their job. Our findings indicate we had better realized that they are both not to continue their work group and don't know group, 2 groups. Finally, in the analysis of the factors related to the turnover intention, our findings suggest that deterioration of the physical and psychological well-being, support, and intention of work-life balance affected the turnover intention of the working carers. In addition, it was revealed that there are differences in factors between the not to continue their work group and don't know group. Therefore, it was suggested that we need a specific approach toward the don't know group, different from the approach toward those who have clear feeling not to continue their work, because it was found that the don't know group tend to be depressed and have little or no support from workplace and others. Next, please. From this analysis, we could reconfirm that the diverse working carers have taken their caring role while they have continued working with complex feeling on work and care. In order to alleviate their struggling situation where we could not get any support from anybody, the opportunity for getting advice and counseling tailored based on the carer's assessment, the carer-friendly workplace, and the collaboration between supporters in workplace and those in communities are needed. In conclusion, and this study highlights the importance of creating the carer-friendly workplaces as well as tailored advice and counseling opportunities based on carer assessment to support these diverse working carers. These findings might have practical implications for employers and social care professionals to reduce the turnover of working carers. In working place, the establishment of support system where working carers could talk about their caring role is needed. At the same time, in the community, the establishment of the comprehensive counseling and support system for working carers and assessing working carers' hidden voices, concerns, and dilemma of balancing work and caring would be needed. The next slide, please. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mai, and thank you very much for sticking to time. I found that presentation very interesting. It's great to see the figures, and it really highlights the need for workplace supports for those carers, particularly those who feel they can't continue work and in the don't know category. I thought it was really, really interesting. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have our third speaker next, and I'm delighted to introduce Yanfei Zhou. I hope I'm saying that correct. And Yanfei is going to is from Japan Institute for Labour Policy and Training. And Yanfei is going to present to us on nursing care of parents in the 30s and 40s, how it hinders the careers and marriages of Japanese carers. So I'm looking forward to hearing this. Thank you, Faye. Yanfei, over to you.
My name is Yanfei Zhou, and today I'm going to give you a talk about the care responsibility of elderly parent in the young age. How will it affect the career and marriage probability of Japanese carers? Next, please. I will talk about the background and my hypothesis, the data used, and also the empirical result. Finally, I will give you some implications. Next, please. First, background. As a result of the weakened traditional nursing care arrangement in Japan, there has been an increasing number of young carers in Japan recently. According to the statistics, the number of carers in their 30s and 40s rose as much as 11% in the last 5 years, from 1.1 million to 1.22 million in just 5 years. And there are some reasons for this phenomena. The most important reason is the late childbirth to old mothers and the late marriage in Japan. And there are only 5% of late childbearing in the 1980s. However, this level reached a record high of almost 30% in 2016. For young carers, the nursing care of their parents is not only a physical burden problem, but also it is related to their career development and marriage probability. So we need to address these issues and to take regard of this problem in the future. Next, please. This is the number of increasing number. You can see that there is a steady increasing number of people who are taking care of their families at a quite high in their 30s to 40, which is quite young life stage. Next, please. And this is the increasing percentage of new births by women aged 35 or over in the last 50 years. And in the most recent years, you can see the level is as high as 30%. Next, please. So my hypothesis, I have 3 hypotheses. The first one is the hypothesis of career disadvantage. Because of taking care of elderly parents at a very young age, and they may facing a negative impact in their career development, especially for the male carers who are relatively more active in the occupational field. Maybe their career will be more impacted. Another hypothesis, lower likelihood of marriage. And I think this could be a more important problem for the female carers because of the limitation of childbearing possible age. So female will facing a larger difficulty getting married if they care their parents at quite high early age. And the last one is that we suppose that the supportive system of the Japanese society, for example, the long-term care insurance system, which is introduced in 2000, which expanded a lot of long-term care at-home services and long-term care facility services in Japan. And hopefully this kind of services could alleviate the problem. Another important system is the long-term care leave system, which also important in 1999. And that system give at a maximum of 93 days of paid leave for the caregivers. And also there exist some supportive systems in the workplaces. We will also check whether the supportive system of the workplace will alleviate the problem or not. Next, please. We use the data conducted by the GOPT in the February of 2019 2019, which is an online survey, and we collected a sample about 4,000. However, in this study, I restricting the sample to the carers aged 50 to 59, which is an age stage when carer development and family formation are almost settled. And we have a treatment group. It are those who started caring for their elderly parent at a relatively young age. And the comparison group is those who began giving nursing care during an older age, in this case, in the 50s. Next slide, please. Here is the descriptive statistics comparison of earning by age and age phase of the care occurrence. And we can compare, for example, the percentage of no earning for the young carers. They have 16.5% of non-earning, and for the older carers, the percentage is 17.4%. There is not such big difference. When we limit it to the male, the percentage is 16.5 versus 14.7%, a little bit higher non-earning percentage for the young carers. When we compare the average earning, we also can find that there are slightly lower average earning for the male young carers. Next, please. And here is the distribution of annual income for the working people. And we didn't find much difference between the young carers and old carers. The two lines are almost overlapping with each other. Next, please. And here is a comparison of marital status between young carers and old carers. First of all, we look at the percentage of single, which is 44.1% for the young carers and 38.2% for the older carers. When limiting it to the female carers, the single percentage is as high as 44.9%, and which is 36.6% for the old carers. So there's much higher percentage of single for the young carers. For those who get married, we can say that the young carers tend to have a higher age of getting married. Next, please. Here is the comparison, distribution of marriage age in for those who are in the 50s. And we can say that compared to the old carers, there is a small hike in the marriage of 50s, which means that the young carers, even they get married, they were more likely to get married at an older age than the old carers. Next, please. So let me give you a summary of the descriptive statistics. First of all, for the hypothesis of career disadvantage, I think maybe it's not very likely because the difference is not so clear, not so significant. If only restricting to the male carers, we can see a slightly higher proportion of zero earning and a lower average earning amount, but maybe the gap is not so significant. We will look at the estimation result. Next, please. And also for the second hypothesis, I think the second hypothesis of lower likelihood of marriage seems to be quite likely. We can see a gap, a huge gap between the likelihood, the percentage of single in 50s. And also we can say that the female young carers tend to have a much late marriage age than the older counterparts. Next, please. Here is the estimation result. Full screen, please. And please pay attention to the, here is the estimation of earning. And please pay attention to the coefficient of the age phase of care occurrence. The base is 50s. We can say that there is most of the coefficient for the 30s and 40s are not statistically significant. For the female, even for the younger carers, they have a slightly higher annual earnings. When we look at the supportive system of the workplace, we can see some of the supportive system is significant, which is imposing some good and a positive effect on the earning of carers. Next, please. Here is the estimation of marriage probabilities. We also should pay attention to the marginal effect of taking young age of care occurrence. Here we can say that for the female owning, taking care of elderly parents at 30s will means 28.8% higher likelihood of less likelihood of getting married in 50s. And for those young carers who began caring in 40s, they are 10.8% less likely to get married. So that's a very huge gap. And also we can see that the utilization of long-term care facilities will improve, have a positive effect on the marriage probability, which means that for those carers who use their facilities, long-term care facilities, they are more likely to get married. Next, please. So the major finding for the estimation result is, first of all, the hypothesis of career disadvantage is not supported by the estimation result. However, the hypothesis of a lower likelihood of marriage is accepted for the females. For the females, if they taking care of their elderly parent at a young age, they are much less likely to get married. And for the hypothesis of supported system boost, which is also accepted partly. Next, please. So here is the implication of my research. First, we can say that balancing the care responsibility and marriage partner hunting could be very difficult or be very challenging for the female young carers. However, promoting the supportive system at the workplace, for example, shortened work hours, exemptions from overtime work for carers, those kind of supportive system will be very necessary for the sake of carers' career development. Also, using of the public long-term facilities is good for, is going to improve the marriage probability of female carers. Since Japan, there is existing a very severe shortage of public long-term care facilities. Maybe in the future, it's important to expanding that kind of services from the perspective of promoting family formation of carers. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yanfei. I think that's a fascinating topic, and I think it really just reflects the sacrifices that many family carers, are faced with when it comes to their own personal life and work as well. So thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, just moving on to the last presentation for this session. So I get to introduce myself. As mentioned, I am a research fellow at University College Dublin. And what I'm going to present on today is part of the CareWell project, which is a 4-year research project being carried out by University College Dublin in partnership with Family Carers Ireland, and is funded by the Health Research Board. So just to say that we were interested in collecting data from working carers during the pandemic. So we conducted a study that looked at balancing family caregiving with employment during the pandemic, and we had conducted a qualitative study. Next slide, please. So in Ireland, it's estimated that approximately 1 in 10 adults is a family carer. And we know that the majority of family carers participate in employment, be it full-time or part-time. And employment for family carers in particular can bring many opportunities. You know, it's a form, of course, of income, but it's also often a source of respite for family carers, and a rest and a break away from their caregiving responsibilities. And work is also a source of a social outlet and other supports in the workplace, such as wellbeing programs. So when the pandemic hit in March 2020, it disrupted the employment of so many, including those who had family caregiving responsibilities at home. Next slide. So what we were interested in doing is finding out, how did the COVID-19 pandemic affect family carers who combined paid employment with a caregiving role? Next slide. So what we did was conduct a qualitative research study. So our inclusion criteria stipulated that participants would be caring for anyone, a family relative with a disability, a chronic illness, or caring due to frailty and aging, and that they were in employment at the onset, just prior to the onset of the pandemic, as well as during the pandemic, and that they were over age of 18 years of age. So that was our participants. We recruited through purpose of sampling, and we primarily recruited through care advocacy organisations, through our own team networks, and through social media such as LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. And we tried to recruit as heterogeneous sample as possible in terms of sex and age, caregiving situation, and work situation as well. But we did encounter a number of recruitment challenges. As you can imagine, this is a time of chaos for a lot of people, particularly for working family carers who are balancing work with caregiving. So we did have to promote the project a few times, and we did have to make concerted efforts to recruit male carers to the study. So in line with public health guidelines, we conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews between June and September, and we conducted those via video-enabled software. And three carers actually requested just to do it over the telephone. So interviews last between 45 minutes and 100 minutes, and they were recorded and transcribed verbatim. And we analysed thematically, and of course we received ethical approval to do the study. Next slide, please. So this slide gives you a sense of the participants that we recruited. We recruited 16 participants in total. 14 were females and 2 were males. And as you can see there, 9 were caring for 1 or more parents, 5 were caring for 1 child needing additional care, 2 were spousal carers, and as you can see, 2 were caring for more than 1 person and were a compound carer. And just to note, 6 carers were actually considered essential frontline workers at the time. So you can see a range of ways that family carers had to adapt their working during the pandemic, primarily by remote working and working from home, while also providing care. The participants were aged between 30 and 62, and 8 worked full-time, and 12 were in the public sector, 3 were in the private sector, and only 1 was self-employed. Next slide, please. So what we found when we analysed the interview data was that there was 4 emerging themes, and these were colliding worlds, navigating uncharted waters alone, opportunity despite adversity, and the relentless unknowing. And so these reflected working family carers' experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to go through each of these in order now, please. Next slide. So the first theme was called Colliding Worlds, and this theme actually portrayed the sense that two worlds had really come colliding for family carers as a result of the pandemic. Carers spoke about the immense time and energy that they had invested in developing bespoke, tailored routines and schedules prior to the pandemic, which comprised of formal and informal supports that enabled them to reconcile work with care. But suddenly these worlds of work and care came colliding, and participants struggled and had to acquire new means of negotiating both their caregiving role and their work role, especially as many workloads increased for many family carers. So they had to trial new ways of working at home, and many spoke about how the blurred boundaries between work and care actually really significantly impacted their mental well-being. So this carer cared for her teenage daughter with cerebral palsy, and she described her experience of balancing work and care at home. She said, "I'm working from home as well, so I'm stuck on a laptop, or I'm doing Zoom calls or Skype calls, that kind of stuff. Now, I'm lucky. She's very, very good in that I had a meeting yesterday on Skype for 2 hours, and she sat alongside me with headphones on. But I'm very lucky. I could do that. But then it meant that the minute the meeting was over, I had to go and get food for her, or I had to change her. I had to get straight back to the next job, be it my 9-to-5 job or my caring role." So that quote reflects how both roles intertwined during the pandemic for carers. Next slide, please. So the second theme was called Navigating Uncharted Waters Alone. And this theme relates to the fact that schools, day centres, childcare and other essential community services closed down almost overnight. And carers were left alone and isolated to continue to provide care at home, while also balancing this with their work commitments. And again, many carers shared their experiences that they felt that on several occasions, they reached a crisis point or a breaking point, and some even went to their doctor to try and get medication to help them to cope. So the first carer here was caring for both her parents, and she described the challenges she was faced with in terms of protecting her parents from the risk of contracting the coronavirus. And she spoke about the carer who normally came into her home. So she said, "The carer comes in the evening time then to get mom into her pajamas and her pads and all that for the night. She got tested for the virus and she had it. So that was a very worrying time for the next 14 days to see, see what it was. Was it really? Then I decided, no, they'll all have to go." So that's where we started then. Yeah, from there, I was doing it all. So this carer had no more support from paid carers or from other sources, and took on all the care herself to protect her parents from the virus. And this is while engaged in paid employment at the same time. So the second carer then was caring for a mother with cognitive impairment. And she spoke about being isolated. And she says, because it's from every aspect of being isolated at home physically, but also being isolated work-wise and not seeing people in work even. And my own mental health deteriorating during that time. So I think isolation has been the worst. So I think that care really shows how she had valued work as a source, a social outlet and a support for her, which enabled her to care and work at the same time. Next slide, please. So the third theme then was around opportunity despite adversity. Despite the fact that many family carers became anxious and distressed as caregiving responsibilities and employment became intrinsically intertwined, they actually still deemed themselves lucky, and they reflected on the opportunities that the pandemic had presented. And some participants spoke about how remote working allowed them to be around more for their relative. And we hear this from the first carer here who's caring for her parents. She said, "I think I have a better relationship with my parents. Not that I didn't have before, but a closer bond because we've been through this now, through thick and thin. I like that as a positive out of this." And the second carer then on this slide, She was actually a full-time senior manager and very much had devoted her time to work. She had had time to reflect on this during the pandemic, and she questioned, would I go back? I don't know. So the positives would be probably being able to disrupt that workaholic treadmill. That probably has been positive. So it just the pandemic gave family carers, working family carers, a chance to reflect and reassess their priorities and give them maybe somewhat a slower pace of life. Next slide, please. So the final theme was the relentless unknown, and I suppose this relates to most of us. It was the unpredictable nature of the pandemic that generated a lot of anxiety for working family carers, especially due to the service closures and the fact that they were often caring for the most vulnerable at risk from the coronavirus. And normally, they could draw on support from school, from day centres, from grandparents, from neighbours. Those services and supports were no longer available to them, and they had struggled those sort of supports prior to the pandemic, and so they were worried would those supports be available, still be available to them after the pandemic. So there was a constant fear around whether existing services would be reinstated and whether they could continue in unpaid employment. And this is a quote from a mother caring for her daughter with autism and an intellectual disability. She says, so I don't know if I'll be able to go back though, that way, because her service hasn't resumed. I won't be able to work from home and I don't know what's going to happen because again, I've no certainty that I'll be able to return to work and I don't know how long they'll let me out. So that quote just reflects this carer's worries around work, around being able to care for her daughter, and that continues. And the worry relates to after the pandemic, what will be the new normal? So next slide, please. So what the study has done, the study has highlighted the importance of replacement care and the supports and services that enable family carers to remain working. It has highlighted that flexible working was pivotal in enabling carers to continue working, as family carers were unable to avail of usual resources and supports and services. Flexibility meant that they could adapt their working schedule to allow them to continue to work and care. We also saw that there was a dependency on family carers. Family carers were left to care at home while balancing it with work and care. And we have to note that the majority of these are women. There was also an increased reliance. What carers did was recognise the amount of reliance they placed on informal carers. So, the hour that maybe grandma collected a child from school until the carer got home from work, or that a neighbour might have dropped in an elderly parent until someone got home from work, those supports were recognisably not available anymore and really became visible of how much reliance was placed in those supports. Carers talked about feeling isolated and unsupported, which led to feelings of distress and anxiety and apprehension. And there was a fear around the viability of the well-established work care arrangements post-pandemic. And despite all this, many carers adopted coping mechanisms and used it as an opportunity to reflect on life, to slow down and to reassess their priorities. Next slide, please. So just to say, our take-home messages then, it's important the services are fully reinstated when it is safe, and that even greater access to these services are available in the future to reduce the number of carers leaving the workforce, especially as there's increased risk that carers will exit the workforce as a result of the pandemic. It is also important that employers recognise the benefits of offering flexible work options, such as flexible work hours, remote working, reduced hours, and so on, especially given the number of family carers who have increased the juggling work and care since the onset of the pandemic. And it's important that there's a concerted effort by policymakers and employers to ensure that the pandemic does not widen existing employment inequalities. We have, it's been widely acknowledged that the pandemic has disproportionately affected women. We just have to be aware of that. Health and social care and employers need to consider innovative ways of supporting working family carers remotely, and increase levels of outreach and communication to alleviate anxieties and avoid them becoming isolated and unsupported. And finally, further research is required, particularly to determine the long-term impact of the pandemic on family carers' employment and caregiving supports, and particularly those family carers who are part of the gig economy, who are on precarious contracts, and who are also self-employed. So particularly we recommend longitudinal and cross-sectional research is undertaken to ascertain how the pandemic has impacted different cohorts of carers. Next slide, please. So yeah, so that was my last slide in terms of the presentation. Can I have the next slide, please? So I just want to thank the carers who took part in the research, but I also want to thank the Carewell team here as well. Next slide, please. And just to say that this presentation was part of a paper that's been accepted for publication on the journal Health and Social Care in the Community. It's just been accepted. So anyone who's interested in reading the full paper, just to watch out for that in the coming months. So that is the end of our 4 presentations this morning. I think we had a good range of, case study examples, quantitative research, qualitative research, and got a good overview of the different issues facing working family carers. So the next step for me then is really to introduce the discussant. So I'm going to introduce, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Kate Hamblin, who is going to share some remarks. And Kate is Senior Research Fellow and co-investigator of the Sustainable Care Programme at the Centre for International Research on Care, Labour and Equalities at the University of Sheffield. So over to you, Kate. I look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Attracta. So, and thank you all for your really, really interesting presentations. What I'm going to do is reflect on each and then do some overarching sort of comments and questions that perhaps we can then explore in the discussion. So I'll start with Mandy. Really interesting practice examples that highlight the challenges related to supporting working carers and the way that employers, one particular employer in this case, were trying to resolve these, and highlighting that some policies may bring particular challenges around line managers needing to be aware and acting as gatekeepers. And what I found interesting with the case study you presented was the approach of that employer included dedicated support for carers, so the carer register, carer leave, but also support for carers within a mainstream wellbeing offer, so the wellbeing passport. And I find that interesting because there is literature in this field, so Galinsky, for example, who sort of presents a continuum of policies to support working carers, starting from ad hoc responses to a few working carers in the workplace, moving through to the mainstreaming of support for working carers at the end point of a continuum. And it's interesting that you've got a blended approach with this case study, and I wanted to just maybe see if we could talk about the benefits, drawbacks of a dedicated support offer versus mainstream support offer, and what perhaps drives the different approaches. Because I think there are lessons that we can then take away to think about how we can frame these drivers to leverage change in similar organisations. So that's what I'd like to maybe invite Mandy to discuss a bit more. And then my reflections on Mai Yamaguchi's presentation. I thought there's really detailed data on the implications of caring and what this means for productivity and job retention, and really highlighting the importance of informal support from colleagues, and also the sort of mediating role that physical and mental well-being has, and how important that is for people who are in physically poor health or mentally poor health, and that really determining whether they consider leaving employment when they're combining work and care. And I wanted to reflect on something in the presentation around the limited take-up of national policies and maybe explore why that might be. And are there other things we can learn from other countries? We've seen examples in the other presentations. And something I also took from the presentation is the idea that working carers are not homogenous. There are differences between those who don't really know if they're going to continue to combine work and care and the support they need, and people who have sort of made the decision not to continue work. So how does policy respond in a nuanced way to these various challenges these different groups face? And is that a question for national policy or policies at enterprise level, or both, really? So those are my comments for Mai. And for Yanfei Zhou, I thought that was a really interesting presentation, exploring implications around marital status, and that was clearly more apparently adversely affected than career progression. So as Attracta says, it highlights the personal sacrifices working carers make. And the presentation also highlighted the importance of supportive arrangements. And I just would like to clarify in the presentation whether the category single included divorcees, and if not, is there future work you could do around the implications of combining work and care on married people's marital status, and whether there are implications around divorce and separation. And I also wanted to explore the supportive systems. So supportive systems 1, 2, and 3 and 4, is that the number available, or are they different types? And if they're different types, are there more optimal combinations or more optimal ways of doing it? Because I think this could be a really nuanced account of how different systems of support can help people remain in employment and promote marriage and relationships. And finally, Attracta's presentation, really interesting, really topical, looking at the impact of COVID-19, and just thinking about the UK. We know from Carers UK data that there's been a huge increase in the number of people identifying as carers during the pandemic, and I'm sure that's true globally. And there were some really interesting things emerging from that presentation about the blurring of the domains of work and care as people are working from home, the sort of colliding worlds, which is a really nice way of conceptualizing that. And the implications then, if work sometimes is a break from caring and you don't have that demarcation anymore, what are the implications? I'm sure there are some positives, there are some negatives, and I wanted to maybe explore what the lasting impact would be, things around the sort of rolling back of services because people have coped, and whether flexible working will become more mainstream, and whether this makes work time more elastic, and do we need to be a bit active in foregrounding what not only the positives are, but also some of the negative implications for working carers around not having these clear dividing lines anymore. So those are my comments for each of the presenters, but I also have some overarching comments that sort of pull threads across all the presentations. And it's clear that combining work and care is a global challenge. And we have different legislative and policy frameworks, but it still remains a global challenge. And the balancing act of work and care has implications for well-being, health, relationships. And we see differences in these national approaches, but also employers' approaches. And one of the things I wanted to pick up is how much flexibility should employers have around their policies, but then what then are the implications for social justice and equality? Because I appreciate that different types of enterprise might have different pressures and different ways of working, and therefore might necessitate different policy responses, but then there are issues around equality and social justice. So when we're thinking about working from home and the COVID pandemic and what implications that had for working carers, there are going to be a huge number of working carers who simply couldn't work from home during the pandemic, key workers. And what did that mean for them? Still having to go to work and care for people who potentially the formal support being provided to them was being changed, scaled back during the pandemic. And that's an important group I think we need to think about. And to really again, think about the pandemic and the opportunities it could perhaps bring around the flexibility working from home agenda, thinking about the blurring of boundaries of work and care, but also, is it a policy window? Thinking about the work of Kind and the idea of policy windows, that certain events provide an opportunity for policy entrepreneurs, and academics are included in that world, to sort of hook their ideas and make a persuasive argument and make change. And if COVID-19 is our policy window, what change would we ask for? So those are my sort of comments for each presenter, and then my overarching ones.
Thank you very much, Kate, for those remarks. Really encapsulate the 4 presentations, and as I say, the common threads to all the presentations. I think maybe we have time now for questions and answers, and I think it would be great if we all the speakers we join back together. And what we might do is take each speaker in order and start off with questions for each speaker, so that we get through everybody, and we look through the floor then as well. And for each speaker, I might actually start off with you for you to ask the first question. So if we go to you, Mandy, if that's okay, to give you a few questions, and I'll ask Kate maybe to start off the questions for Mandy, and then we'll open up to everyone else. So you want to go ahead, Kate, and ask Mandy any questions about her research?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. So Mandy, I wanted to maybe pick up on this whole mainstream versus dedicated support, and what the different implications this might be for working carers, because certainly in some of the research I've done, there are advantages to both approaches. You know, the risk that in a mainstream approach carers get lost and don't identify, but then if it is mainstream, there isn't the sort of stigma or reticence about identifying yourself as being unusual, because it is a wellbeing offer, it's for everyone. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, like you say, I think there's no right answer to this. It was particularly with my industrial placements, I worked with 4 different sectors: the public, the private, the charity, and the community interest company. And I had to tailor the recommendation to each of their needs, so they were very different. And for one organisation, having more dedicated support for carers was the right way forward, but for others it wasn't. The public sector employer, the HR person I worked with within that organisation, she had a much wider wellbeing focus of the work she was doing, and was doing a lot of promotion of wellbeing of all employers within that public sector organisation. And so trying to fit in dedicated carer support was a bit harder, and she was under budget constraints, time constraints, and so for her it was much better to look at wider policies that incorporated carer support but also supported other employers. And yeah, with other organisations I spoke to, one organisation was particularly focusing on support for people who are experiencing domestic abuse, and really wanted to give them support. So felt like they needed a wider wellbeing focus, so that certain employers weren't neglected. So it was relevant to everybody. So it very much tailored to individual organisations, and obviously I could go in with the placements and spend time discussing what suited them, but you can't do that for every employer. So I suppose that was the purpose of the policy briefs I wrote for each sector, that gave recommendations for all the different sectors from within those sectors. So what suited them. So hopefully things that other organisations could pick up, that they could adapt for their own needs. So.
Any more questions then for Mandy from anyone? Mandy, I found your presentation, as I said, fascinating. You know, we do have employers for carers in the UK. In Ireland here, we're a bit further behind, and we're learning. So the case studies were excellent for me, and what companies and organisations actually can do to support their carers in their workplace, and definitely learning from them. And I really liked your guidelines and 5 Ps. I think that really kind of is a really, very simple but effective framework of how an employer can look at their supports and think how can I respond to these and support the carers within my workforce. So I thought that was fantastic. I was interested in the placements, Mandy. When you say placements, was it you that had a placement within the workplace, or how did that work? Or
Yeah, it worked differently for each of the organisations. So with one, I spent the whole week sat within that organisation and met up and talked with people within that organisation throughout that whole week. And I actually did that with a couple of the organisations. For others, I just went in on days that suited the employers over a period of 6 months. So did it that way. So it worked differently. So I spoke to the management, some of the employees. I sat on management boards. I gave presentations and things about my research, and so did it like that.
And was it difficult to negotiate access to those organisations? Like, I mean, to be able to sit in management board and really get that cultural stance and actually be in there, I admire that, and I think it's fantastic. So, were employers and organisations receptive of you coming in to their company?
It was really difficult to get the initial placement set up, and it took a lot of work and contacting a lot of different people within the areas to get those set up. But I think once they were on board, then they really welcomed my input into helping with their support for working carers. One of the people I worked with within the third sector organisation had just been appointed as the carers champion for that organisation and was completely lost as the way forward of what she should do within that role. So having my support, she really valued it and was really enthusiastic and was emailed me a lot of questions throughout the research, and I tried to help her as much as possible to support her in her role.
Has anyone else got any more questions for Mandy? Lots of questions for everyone. So can I ask Mandy one quick question before maybe we move on to the next person? And again, did you find more in the public sector employers and the private sector employers in terms of the supports that they offer to carers in their workforce?
It was very different because the private sector was a manufacturing company, so it was part of the food industry. So it was really much more difficult to get specific support for working carers within that organisation. The person I worked with there, she tried to run an event in the dining room, just giving information out for working carers and for people to come and speak to her. And the people, the employers weren't allowed to leave their lines to come and actually speak to her. So she was having to do that within their lunch breaks, and of course they had very short lunch breaks. So it was really hard for her. So we had to think of other ways to provide support, just having information, having posters, and obviously they didn't have people who worked on the lines, didn't use computers, so there was no way of using sort of intranet sites. So it was being a bit more creative about how you approached that company, whereas the public sector, they already had a lot of support in place, so it was much easier to either adapt what they already had or add to what they already had in place.
That's great, Mandy. That's great. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. So we might move on to some questions for Mai now. I was looking at turnover and intentions. If you wouldn't mind starting the questions for Mai. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mai's presentation also highlights the importance for a bit of nuance in policy, that a one-size-fits-all approach might not help everybody. Depending on their perspective, their inclination to remain in work, and whether they've got physical and mental well-being considerations as well, it seemed would be important. And something that the presentation touched on was the limited take-up of the national policies, and I wanted to maybe ask if you know why that might be, what the sort of reasons are that people are not taking those up, and if not, and if you know why, what sort of approach would you suggest might actually be able to cater to the varying needs of working carers, because they're not a homogenous group. So how do we design a policy that can help the various different challenges they face?
Thank you very much for the comment. So first, it might be very difficult to understand Japanese cultural situation and Japanese business culture situations. So maybe you or other people from other country cannot believe that even we have a paid work leave, we cannot take it, or we have to have a too long long hour working hours. So even though we do not have so much paid opportunities, so these are the context or culture we are facing. So that affect balancing work and care. So we have a long-term care insurance service from the 2000, and we have a lot of service maybe compared to other countries. We have a long-term care services. It's public service, so it's good. But even though we have these services, we have a problem. So maybe that's because we have so many aging population, and even though we use the services, and we the family caregiver still have more roles. So during the COVID-19, we cannot use the long-term care services. So much more stress and much more role comes to the family caregivers. So even though we have a national policy, long-term care and paid care leave for the workers, they only few percent use the program. Maybe that's a problem. So maybe for the future, national need to have a national initiative how we can really care for the carers. So maybe recognition and societal recognition and awareness may be very limited. So even though we have a program, so we cannot use. So maybe we have to change the culture, organizational culture, because we cannot talk about caring issues at the workplace. So maybe these small things we need to change. So in this study, we only focus for the people who want to quit their job, but we found that 20% of those don't know what to do. So maybe it's very complicated issue, work issues and service issues and family issues. So maybe we need organize comprehensively, and maybe professional support would be needed, and also voluntary section would help. Carers cafe, carers support group, or maybe needed. So maybe in total, maybe society need to recognize the importance of the carers first, then encourage to them to continue work and caring. So national government only focus on reducing the number of the turnover for the caring role, but only for the numbers or outcome, it doesn't work well. So I think we need more. We don't have care assessment, so they said they need it, but they have no budget. So maybe we need support and budget and financial support or a program, mandatory program for the carers. At the moment, we only have balloons, no budget, and no human resources. That might be the reason we cannot success. Is that what you asked?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mai and Kate. Any other questions for Mai? Mai, I was interested when you raised the issue of the hidden care in the workplace, because from my experience, even from our own research, I'm aware of people who will not even participate in research in case their manager, their line manager, finds out that they're a carer, because they think that they will be possibly biased against or discriminated against when it comes to promotion, and that they'll be perceived as someone who may not be as available because of their caregiving responsibilities. So I think that was fascinating, that the hidden care within the workplace. So would you feel that sharing for workers to share that they have caregiving responsibilities with their employers and with their colleagues, do you think that is a beneficial thing to the working care, that they should share that they have these caregiving issues?
So it is very delicate issue to talk about the personal matter and caring matters, but maybe we need atmosphere or a chance to talk and speak up at the workplace will be needed. So maybe we need, maybe sometimes it might be good, not in the same workplace, but for the other outside of the network, or other groups can talk each other about the caring role. So to avoid hidden carers, so we need both way inside the workplace, and especially for the colleagues. And boss cannot, even though we cannot talk to boss, we can talk to colleagues. So in workplace, we need some challenge, and maybe and also we need outside the company or organization, we can maybe make a network like a UK. So, and on the other countries, maybe we can safely talking situation or a place would be needed, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions before we move on for Mai? Okay, maybe we'll pass some questions over now to Yanfei. Thank you, Mai. Yanfei, about her research around marriages and careers for family carers. I thought this was fascinating. So again, Kate, if you don't mind if I call on you to start the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, Yanfei, it was really interesting. I just wanted to clarify whether the category single included people who are separated and divorced, because if not, that might be an interesting avenue to look at. Okay, so what happens when working carers do get married? Are there additional pressures within marital relationships, and have implications for divorce and separation? And my other question, which was about clarifying the supportive systems 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that the number of supportive systems available, or are you able to tease out the different types of support and then the impact to try and work out whether it's not about the number of support, but the qualitative type of support, and whether that produces different outcomes?
Thank you very much for your comment, Kate. And for your first question, whether the single include the divorced, yes, it include. Because, however, in the questionnaire, we cannot tell whether she is a never married single or a divorced single. So I cannot give you a very clear answer about how many people never get married. So this could be a future question I have to tackle in the future. And for your second questions, for the supportive systems in the workplace, which is referring to 4 different kind of supportive systems, which include long-term care leave on a continued period. Like I introduced that Japan introduced the long-term care leave system in 1999. Will permit the caregivers to take a maximum of 93 days of paid leave. So the first one is that kind of supportive system. And the supportive system also include family care leave on a daily pace, which is about 5 days in maximum. And the supportive system 3 is shortened work hours. And the supportive system 4 is exemption from overtime work and holiday work. And according to the estimation result, I found that the supportive system of 3 and 4 is especially significant impact the earnings of caregivers. So in my implications, I suggest that it's very important to enrich this kind of supportive system in the workplace if you want to help the young carers or all of the carers to get rid of their career development problems. That's my major information in this research.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think
Did I answer your
more
question?
you could tease out there and make a paper on that.
Yeah.
That would be.
Thank you, Yanfei. Any other questions for Yanfei? I was interested, Yanfei, in the gender element. You would have heard me in my presentation saying, women, do provide the majority of family care, although there are more males. But your first hypothesis, I think you rejected, that you expected males, because they're maybe more involved in the workforce and maybe hold more senior positions, that they might be impacted. Just wanted to expand a little bit more on the gender impacts there with marriage and careers. And can you see any solutions of how this could be kind of dealt with in the future?
The solution is very difficult. As I mentioned, that there is so much big biological difference between male and female. For the male, they get very old, they can have a possibility to get children. However, for the female, their marriageable age is quite short in the Asian countries, not only in Japan, but also in China, Korean. And if you are older than 35 years old, you have a much lower probability to get married or to get birth to a child. So that's why this problem is especially severe for the female caregivers. So it's hardly to get rid of this problem by policies. However, I think promoting, providing more services of long-term care facility services is very important. In large, there are 2 kinds of arrangement for long-term care to their families in Japan. First, most of people taking care of their parents at home, and a small proportion of people using the long-term care facilities. However, because they are very limited supply of public long-term care facilities in Japan, because it's cheap in Japan, many people have to choose at home, taking care of their children, taking care of their elderly families. That will be big neck. If in the future Japan can provide more long-term care facility services, I think many of the women, female carers, will be saved, or will getting a higher probability to get married in the future. Especially in this pandemic, I think there exists a very huge disparity between those caregivers taking care at home and those caregivers who put their families in the long-term facilities. Those who taking care of families at home are especially impacted by the COVID-19 this time, because to keep social distance, many Japanese long-term care service companies stopped providing at-home visiting long-term care services. In the past, many of the family using that kind of service to balance their work and care responsibility. However, in this COVID-19 pandemic, it's very difficult. So I guess, although I didn't collect big data, I have a hypothesis that those people who are taking care of their parents or elderly families at home this time, maybe their work will be very damaged this time. I don't know what happened in United Kingdom, but in Japan, it's very likely to be happening.
Thank you, Yanfei. So really interesting points of discussion there. I think we could really spend the day delving into them. I'm conscious of time too, so I'm going to move on to the last speaker, which is myself. And my presentation was around balancing work and care for family carers during the pandemic. So I'm going to invite Kate for any questions, first of all.
Yeah, and I think it builds on just the comments just now about the implications of COVID-19 moving forward. And maybe that's something we could discuss is, the lasting impact of COVID-19, what it will mean for work and how we work, and what that means for combining work and care, but also what that means around equalities and not just around gender. We know that potentially women did more of the caring during COVID-19, and therefore it had a greater impact on their employment, but also different types of work and the ability to work from home versus the ability to being a key worker and being somewhere else and combining work and care. And I just wondered if we could discuss that a bit further, Attracta, and what your research indicates around that.
Yeah, so because it was a qualitative study, we only had 16 participants, and as I said, we were lucky to get those because people were not only working but caring and had all these other stresses, homeschooling, everything else. So you're right in terms of the long-term impacts of the pandemic, because we don't know what they're going to be for people's work and care. We saw in the presentation carers' anxieties around that, and then as highlighted for women, because they have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. So in terms of the, I think we're going to see long-lasting mental health problems and stresses from the pandemic as a result of caring. And as you rightly say, it has changed the way we've worked and has changed the way we've worked for family carers. Many could work remotely, and that sometimes brought benefits and stresses, but also, as you say, the ones that couldn't work from home as well. And I'm thinking of one particular participant who was manager dealing with COVID cases, and it was extremely stressful for her. She had a teenage son with developmental disabilities, and she struggled with providing care for him, so much so that her husband had to ring in sick or take annual leave, but I know he rang in sick several times to allow her to go to work so that he would stay at home and provide the care. Now, that particular participant was one that relied on family or grandparents, you know, who would come in and help out for those times that they had no cover. But that's what the pandemic did, and that's they took away those natural informal supports that filled those gaps for family carers to be able to go work and care. And that particular family care actually ended up taking some sick leave. It was too much for her and had an impact on her health. So certainly the impacts, I think we will begin to see the long-term impacts unfold in the coming months and years for family carers, working family carers, and the juggling act. And as you say, then it can bring benefits too. It can, you know, flexible working can enable family carers to balance work with care. So remote working is only one form of flexible working. So I think we can see if the pandemic has probably given an opportunity for carers to see what works for them to balance care. You know, can I start work an hour later? Can I finish work an hour earlier? Can I, you know, spread my hours across, you know, 5-6 working days? So I think it was an opportunity in that light to trial new ways of working for working family carers. And I think employers going forward need to be more open and receptive to working with employees with caregiving responsibilities and see what works for both sides. Because, you know, prior to the pandemic, remote working for many people, it just wasn't an option. And the pandemic now has shone a light on that yes, may in fact work, and they may in fact work to working carers benefit. Not all of them, but some of them.
And business, you know, there are, for the employers, there are benefits to maybe having a greater number of your workforce working remotely, in terms of, you know, you're saving quite a lot of money on your premises and things.
That's it.
Yeah. I think that's, and I think I do wonder. Mandy raised the issue of line managers mediating policies. If more line managers have now been working from home and having to perhaps balance homeschooling and other challenges, it may have made them perhaps more empathetic and understanding of what it's like to have to do a balancing act. Maybe not the same sort of balancing act, but still a balancing act, and what that's actually like on a day-to-day basis.
I think you're absolutely right there. I think it really has brought to the forefront the challenges faced by working family carers and those employers who are parents who've had to juggle the laptop and then homeschooling and back to the laptop, and may actually have a more empathetic approach to their carers. And I think the fact that there's been a light on carers across the whole forefront throughout the pandemic, both paid carers and those working in hospitals, providing frontline essential workers, many who are women, but also the family carers who just had to provide that care in the community. They were just left to do it on their own. So I think maybe the pandemic has raised awareness a little bit more, and through those who may have parenting challenges. And I mean, things have moved on tremendously. I mean, you know, to have children in the background in the middle of a Zoom call is fairly normal now, you know. And similarly, if you have, you know, a mother who has dementia, you know, that walks through the room, it's acceptable now. So things have changed dramatically. So I think there's a lot of room to learn from the pandemic and what that brought. I think there's a lot of learnings in there, and we have to kind of try and use them and work with them and take the opportunities from them as much as possible.
Yeah, the race to get back to normal, we need to pause and think, actually, do we want all of normal? Or are there things we can take forward? Yeah.
Anyone else got any questions for me? No? Okay. Are there any general comments or questions now for any of the speakers about anything that was spoken about this morning that we want to mention or cover at this point? No. I think we're probably coming to an end then to the session. I don't know, Kate, if you have any concluding remarks that you want to finish up on, or
Thank you for your really, really interesting presentations that brought a lot of nuance and texture and raised some really important issues that I think it just highlights how important the work you're all doing is, but also how much there is for more and more knowledge and information on working carers and what can support them. And thank you.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you to all of our speakers and for keeping to time. And I think we're almost on time. So that just leaves me to really say goodbye, thank you, good luck, and that we close the session.